I'd like to welcome Executive Director Michael Ryan to the Queensborough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to put this here for a minute. Well, first of all, thank you to Mr. Orenstein for giving me the opportunity to come out and address you guys tonight. There are some folks here, there's some friendly faces that I recognize as employees of the Board of Elections. Some of them have heard my story already, so for those folks I apologize, but you're going to have to go through a little bit of a repeat performance. As Mr. Orenstein detailed briefly in my bio, I started out working for the City of New York as a probation officer 25 years ago, and I decided to go to law school at night. I kind of worked my way up the ladder. I ended up in the Commissioner's office at the probation department. Later went on to serve in the Giuliani administration in the Criminal Justice Coordinator's office, which under that iteration oversaw all of the criminal justice agencies for the city. I worked on some big projects like the fire department EMS merger. I left that job, went over to the governor's office in a similar capacity, where I was Deputy Director of Criminal Justice for New York State. What we did in that capacity is we actually set the criminal justice policy for the state of New York and the Pataki administration. I left the Pataki administration to go into private practice, where I stayed for 15 years. And I was kind of cajoled to come back into city service. Initially, I resisted the overtures to have me come back as the executive director, but ultimately I decided to take on the challenge. And one of the reasons that I decided to take on the challenge was the Board of Elections had been a rudderless ship for too long. There was an impasse as to a new executive director after the previous executive director was removed, and the folks couldn't get together. And it seemed to come to a point where they were coalescing, or there was some coalescence around me taking the job. And I said, you know, if there are people out there, if no one's willing to take on a difficult challenge, then the difficult challenges don't get fixed. And the Board of Elections is certainly a place that was in need of some remedial attention. But I will say that is through no fault of the good men and women that work at the Board of Elections. The problems emanated primarily from the management side of things. And some of them are perception in nature and not in actuality. And some of them are actual problems that really need to be resolved. So I came in August of 2013 on the 26th. It was a Monday. And, you know, we had a primary 3 weeks later. And then we had a runoff after that. And then we had a general election in very short order. And we also had, as you guys all know, because you're good citizens and good voters, we had lever machines for the primary and the runoff, which is a problem that has gone away temporarily, and we hope it will go away permanently. They need to stretch the time between the election events in order for the electronic machines to be turned around and redeployed. The reason that is, and I'll show you this ballot, and then we'll talk about some more ballot stuff afterwards. But see this ballot here? Across the top you have these dashes, and down the side you have these dashes, and same thing on the bottom and the other side. These are called timing marks. They have to line up where the ovals are so that the machine knows what it's reading. And each one of these ballots, and when you consider in a citywide election all the disparate number of candidates that run in all the different locations, every one of these ballots has to be electronically built into those machines so that when you put the ballot in, it knows what it's doing. That is a labor-intensive process on the back end. So when we have a primary and we got to take those machines back, we have 1,300 poll sites throughout the city. When we're doing scan machines, we have about 3,400 machines that we deploy. They will have to be delivered, collected back, changed, and redeployed. And that's where the technology is not as easy as it was with the lever machines. The lever machines had ballot strips in them. We pulled those machines back. We pop out the ballot strip, slap a new ballot strip in, and the machines are ready to go all over again. It's a little bit simplistic because they have to make some adjustments to the back of the machine as well, but certainly less technical than the Scantron machines, the DS200s as we call them. So we hope that those go away. We know that the combination of the lever machine and then transitioning back to the DS200 for the general created some confusion. People got, I think, the people that wax nostalgic, as I did. I remember going into the voting booths with my parents. We kind of liked that lever machine, and those folks, when they saw it come back, they were all excited. Oh, they're back! We finally got rid of these scanners. And then it was a dirty trick because November rolled around and we switched back. But the reality is, some form of electronic voting is here to stay, whether it's these DS200s that we're using or there's going to be a new generation of machine later on. We're not going backwards to the lever machines. And we can collectively thank the United States Congress, and regardless of where you stood on the issue, it all traces back to Bush v. Gore, right? Because once Bush v. Gore happened, then you saw the people in Florida looking up at the lights. Congress decided that, well, if it's not working in Florida, it's not working anywhere, and the entire country has to go to some type of more uniform, voting machine process. Now, technically and theoretically, we're only bound to use those electronic machines by law in federal elections. The state legislature's kind of, working on that a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, we can't have two voting systems. We have to have one system that works for all the elections. I mean, we deploy 5,500, I think it was 5,562 for the general, for the primary with the lever machines. They take up a lot of room. They have to be stored. It just exponentially adds to the cost if we have multiple voting machines. That having been said, there are some new iterations of the electronic machines that are out there that various vendors have come up with that would solve a bunch of problems for us if they ever became part of the voting process. For example, it would be a touchscreen machine, and then you would put a blank ballot in, and it would print out your choices on there, and then you would take that over to the scanner. That's one way that you could do it, and then that would relieve us of this whole problem of building the ballot and doing all of that background work. So we have some stuff on the horizon that we think is going to be beneficial to the borough of Queens in the context of the system that we presently have. And one of the things that I think the commissioners did that was the best thing that they could have done under the present set of circumstances for the borough of Queens. We have these limited English proficiency districts that require the languages, multiple languages to be printed. Queens is the most demographically and ethnically diverse in terms of concentrations of different ethnicities in the city. And as such, you have 5 potential languages in the borough of Queens. English, Spanish, Chinese, Bengali, and Korean. That exists nowhere else in the city. The most you have in any other borough is Brooklyn and Manhattan. Portions of those boroughs have 3, English, Spanish, and Chinese. You have 79 election districts in Queens that require all 5 languages. So what was done when the ballots first came out in 2010 was they printed all 5 languages on the ballot. And that's where we ended up with that really small font, because the piece of paper, is only of a certain size. We can go up to, basically, with the way we can do it now is we can go up to a 19-inch ballot with an 1.5 inch stub. Once you run out of room, you run out of room. And the only choice then you have is to make it smaller. And even with the ballot marking devices available at the polling places. It's an inefficient way to do it. So what we did under the present set of circumstances, our staff came up with some solutions, and the commissioners passed a resolution that no ballot will have more than 3 languages on. So there will be 79 election districts in Queens that will have multiple ballot styles. A ballot with Spanish, English, Spanish, and Chinese, a separate ballot with English, Spanish, and Korean, and a separate ballot with English, Spanish, and Bengali. What that will allow us to do is it will allow us to bump up the font, and we expect that the font for the general election will be no smaller than a 10-point font, as opposed to the 6-point font that we used, for the last election. So that's a substantial improvement. Doesn't get us all the way home, but we are also dealing with a system that was thrust upon us by an act of Congress. And you had 2 vendors going back in time when they were chosen, but they had 2 vendors that essentially had, substantially similar machines.